Thank you, Professor Pickel, for joining us today. This video is for Psychology 100 as well as consumer behavior. Yes, we're going to be talking about motivation this unit, and we invited Professor Pickel to join us so she can give us insight into the work world with motivation as well as marketing. So thank you for joining us. Do you feel as if psychology shows up in the marketing world?
Yes, all of the behavioral sciences are very important to marketers and the general field of business. So when we talk about psychology, we're talking about our thinking processes and how important it is with motivation of consumers. And then we talk a lot about it in organizational behavior, about motivation of employees. So we're consumers out there, whether you're a single household or an extended family household, and we are, most of us are employees, either part-time, full-time, or we've worked in companies. So motivation is critical to how we get our jobs done and how motivated we are to make complex purchases, such as save money for our home, spend weekends looking for a house. Motivation is critical to enrolling in college. So many of the continuing education students have experienced that goal in mind to come back to college, or traditional students, the traditional college age is more like out of high school. You were motivated during high school to know that you wanted to enroll in college. That's part of motivation. Now we have to stay motivated to complete our degrees. So those of us that work in higher education, whether we're marketers or professors, we are cognizant all the time about motivation. And to give you some of my background, I've been a full-time professor here at Central Penn for 14 years. So I teach in business administration, but mostly the marketing-related classes, such as consumer behavior, advertising, marketing management, strategic planning and marketing communications, principles of marketing. Before I became an educator, my first job out of college, I'm a graduate of Penn State main campus with a Bachelor's of Science in Marketing. I worked for NCR Corporation and sold the retail systems divisions. So we had to motivate in training and development to learn new technology to go from what used to be the old mechanical NCR cash registers to scanning. So in the 1980s, when I started that job, that's when scanning was introduced. So now it's all part of our shopping experience, but that was part of training and development. Then I went back to graduate school, worked at Penn State Harrisburg for my MBA as a graduate assistant, advising small businesses, which is very important to motivation so that they could be motivated to get business plans done, start up their businesses, find capital, etc. Then I spent over a decade working with engineering companies doing business development. So part of that was motivating engineers to think about marketing and business development. Engineers are trained to think about a project and design, but they also now have to be part of the team to develop new business with the new accounts. Then I began teaching part-time and eventually came into full-time teaching. So that's my background.
And I'm interested to know how the field of marketing and business defines motivation.
A good definition for a marketing perspective to motivation is the driving forces that compel consumers to action. So I like this, that it's an internal force, but it puts us as consumers in the driving seat, or as employees, or as parents. So you can think of consumers in any of our roles as in our household, in the workplace, as parents, as caretakers to maybe some of our elderly parents. So it's, to repeat that again, I like to think of the best definition as the driving forces that compel consumers to action. The action is what's important to marketers. That action is, we are going to motivate you to save for a home, save for retirement. So think of all the financial services that market products to help us save for a house, save for retirement, save for your children's college education, save for your own college education. The other part is in complex purchases, we'll never spend enough time looking for a home unless we're highly motivated. So especially when you're looking for a home, you need to be highly motivated. And when you're planning that special trip, so think of travel agents or ourselves booking on Travelocity or Expedia, we have to be motivated to appoint time in our time management schedule to plan that trip. So marketers use it a lot with the action, because the action is for a marketer or a retailer to sell you something. So Apple is very good at this. They motivate people who just bought an iPhone a year ago to stand in line to pre-order electronically the new iPhone or the new iPad. And when we talk about motivation, remember, prices with motivation can be on a continuum from expensive homes to affordable technology to even Walmart with everyday low price, to motivate us to shop for our groceries at Walmart, not just our general needs. So Walmart's always out there showing us price comparisons that you can get a better deal from there.
And how do marketers take someone from thinking about doing something to the actual purchase? Like, what is used to drive for that action?
Well, we call that a stimulus and a cue. So the stimulus is to get your attention, and the cue would be an ad. That ad can be in our Sunday papers, a flyer, Target. It can be a pop-up ad electronically when you're on a website. It can be social media today. It can be a radio ad. So all of marketing communications is really used to stimulate our attention. So we need to get attention, because we don't buy the action until we have attention, interest, desire, action. So we call it AIDA. So if anybody knows the famous operas, think of AIDA. Attention, interest, desire, action. So there has to be some sort of either thinking process once we see an ad, or psychology is also related to sociology. A friend or a family member, which is more sociology, recommending something to us, the new technology, a new notebook, etc. So think of that again: attention, interest, desire, action. And one of the most interesting fields is to combine psychology with sociology and social psychology. So I'm not sure if you'll get to that, how it's really combined into both fields. So once you've gotten someone's attention, remember, there's a lot of clutter out there. So I don't know if there's anyone in the class that has had advertising, but there's a lot of clutter out there. There's too many messages. So remember, inside our heads, our cognition, our thinking processes, and psychologists call it our cognitive behavior, and we pick up on that in marketing, is the part that we can't have information overload, or we won't make a decision. We won't get to action. So we have to break through with our marketing communications, whether it's social media or a traditional ad, break through all that clutter and somehow use a compelling message to compel a consumer to action. That compelling message can be creative. It can connect to what our needs are. So, for example, Dr. Maslow, I'm not sure if you've studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs yet. Dr. Maslow proposed these needs. Now, as in marketing, we take these needs to get us from attention, interest to desire, and then to the action. We take these needs and we'll develop slogans based upon those needs. So, for example, safety, the most basic need is physiological, the next need is safety and then social. We'll talk a minute about safety and social. So safety, all the insurance companies are using that slogan to get us to move from attention with the slogan to being interested in taking care of our families, to desire, calling an insurance agent or doing it online, and then action would be the transaction, finalizing insurance. So, for example, some of the famous slogans, you don't even have to be a marketer to know them, are like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. So State Farm takes a message that connects, they're our neighbor and they're going to help us if we have a problem with our home, if we have a problem with a car, okay? Health insurance. State Farm's even a bank. A lot of people don't know that State Farm Insurance is both insurance and a bank. So they're there for our financial needs, okay, to protect our families. That's safety. You're in good hands with Allstate. Very much leads us through attention, interest, desire, action. Oh, we're in good hands. I need to protect my family. Okay? And then social, a great one, is Hallmark. For decades, they've used the slogan, when you care enough to send the very best. Okay? So when you care enough, you'll go to a Hallmark store. So that's the desire to buy cards with Hallmark and all the other gift items you can get at Hallmark. So when you care enough to send the very best. Now they use life as a special occasion, and that's also very much leading us through attention, interest, desire, action that is part of our society and part of our thinking process as parents and caretakers, that we want our children to experience a special occasion for their birthdays. We want our friends to experience a special occasion. So those are two great examples that gets us from the thinking process of the attention, interest, desire. And remember, businesses don't make money until we transact deals. Now, we need to build relationships in that action. So marketers are very motivated, and we're advocates for our customers. So consumers, like retailers sell to consumers, we're motivated to establish a long-term relationship. So part of that motivation in business is brand loyalty. So we're going to have numerous brand loyalty programs. Think of how well Giant works with their brand loyalty, with their gas rewards. This time of year, you make purchases there, you can get a turkey. Those are really great examples of motivation theory that we use in marketing.
And what role does emotion play into the consumer going to the action?
Okay, great question. Consumers, you and I, are much more emotional in our buying. We compare consumers' buying to business buying. So when businesses buy for their operations, we talk about business buyers, such as the purchasing agent, being much more rational. So they're using ration in their thinking processes, meaning best delivery, best performance. When we look at consumers and we buy for our households, we are much more emotional in our buying. So if we've had a bad day, oftentimes we do not want to make a meal, so we'll eat out. Okay? If we have had a stressful week, we may enjoy shopping at the end of that week. So marketers understand emotional buying, and we have to be cognizant of making sure when we look at what's good for society with emotional buying is that we're not making people buy and then have huge credit card debts. So for marketers, we're re-looking at financial security and consumption, and knowing that we should never deceive consumers into buying more than they can afford. So we have to be careful with this emotional buying, that people aren't out buying a house emotionally or a new car. If it's a $10 purchase of stopping at McDonald's, then that's different. Okay? So we are very much emotional. We use emotion to make ourselves feel better. And in consumer behavior, we actually, in Chapter 4, have a whole chapter on motivation. We have a section on motivation and emotion, that as consumers are driven to have positive emotion and mood. We want to work very hard to reduce negative feelings. So if we've hurt someone's feelings, maybe we'll send them a card to change that mood. Maybe we'll take time to go visit someone who's experiencing difficulty. So, maybe Starbucks. So it never has to be a huge emotional purchase, but even the small items we use an emotion.
And transitioning into the concept from a consumer to an employee standpoint, and we have future bosses in our classes, I'm sure, how does one, I understand how marketers motivate people to action, but how do employers or bosses motivate employees to action, to perform essentially what they want them to do?
Great question. If anyone has had any human resources classes, organizational behavior classes, the big theme is that today as supervisors and bosses, we should be leaders. So it's a big change from when I learned organizational behavior in the 80s when I graduated from college. We're talking about leaders need to motivate, we use that word, inspire, lead, okay? Before we used to talk about bosses often use, well, I can fire you as coercive measures. you don't perform well. We have left the idea of managers that can be coercive into now leaders that will motivate the team, that will inspire the team to a established goal. So just like you have goals for your household to save money for a home or save money for college, we have goals in the workplace, and many of us work as teams. So if one person lets down the team, someone else has to pick up the slack. So we're using motivation in the workplace that as a team setting, we need to keep that motivation high for every employee. So you need to find out what employees are good at. We love to perform our strengths. So figure out on your team what the strengths of every team member are. Then from there, assign the workflow based upon those strengths. So maximize each team member's strengths, okay? And then emotion comes into the workplace. Often leaders don't want to admit this, but you can have an employee who's having a bad day, who has financial problems, so has a spouse that's ill. So emotion comes into the workplace. So we're teaching an organizational behavior. Unlike the 80s, it was like bosses just felt that employees, once they were in work, shouldn't bring anything from home into the workplace. Well, that's not a realistic perception. So we need to deal sometimes with the emotions of employees at work. And we often have, seminars that they can go to if they have stress management. Many of the best employers out there offer relaxation theory, offer counseling, have child care settings now on their workplace settings, have all kinds of human resources benefits that also help with what employees are dealing with. So that whole idea of motivating the workplace is very similar to get all of the team to a goal and allow your team members to establish goals. Because if you establish your own goal, you're more motivated to meet that goal. So those days of top-down management are much gone in the workplace today in the 21st century. It's much more about every team member is involved in planning performance goals.
And if the shoe is on the other foot for our students, that they're serving as employees and say they're working with someone who still has the 80s mentality, like the blind obedience mentality, how do you recommend that employee motivate their supervisor so they can get on the same page?
Well, you're going to have to come to an agreement. Out there, if you go to careerbuilder.com or any of those advice places, they often have articles how to deal with difficult bosses, and there's all kinds of reasons bosses are difficult. It could be because they have what's called more of the 80s or 90s mentality versus the 21st century. So when you are thinking about as an employee, what you can do, you need to understand your boss's mentality too. So it's not just your boss, but you need to think one supervisor above your boss, because your boss reports to someone. So come to an agreement of some way that you can help alleviate any kinds of workflow difficulties with your boss, and then you can learn to lead up the channel of workflow. Leaders aren't always top down. An entry-level employee can be a leader, a decision maker that people look to. So find out a way that you and your boss can come to an agreement of a goal that will inspire you. Ask for special projects. I don't think we teach enough of this in college that you never demand, but you should ask, is there a way I can serve on a special committee or a special project? It shows that you are assertive. We always want assertive, just don't be aggressive about it, but it shows assertiveness, and it shows that you are a team player, okay? So always figure out what your boss's goal is too, and that'll help you in the workplace. And you can always have a conversation that you're taking a class and you've learned about leadership, okay? And you want to be part of inspiring the team. So that's always a great way, especially those of you in continuing education students that already have jobs. Oftentimes your employer is paying for it, so if you can use those skills to have a conversation. There's a great book out there about how to have difficult conversations, and it's very much about motivation theory, so just go to Amazon and you can Google the book called How to Have Difficult Conversations. So if any of you are experiencing that, difficult conversations aren't just in the workplace. Parents, those of you that are parents, you sometimes have to have difficult conversations with your children to motivate them. Okay, so that's, that book would help many of you in the whole idea of inspiring with a conversation, not just burying the idea and becoming passive-aggressive, because that's what a lot of psychologists are concerned, that in the workplace everybody just passively follows, but what's the aggression behind that? So if you take the time to have the conversation, that often alleviates that passive-aggressive behavior.
And when you talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we are going to cover that in this unit. It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite theorists. As employees and as individuals, how do you recommend, in your experience, that people become aware of what level they're operating at?
That's a good point, because I always started teaching marketing classes first. So when I learned Maslow's in psychology and social psychology as an undergraduate, when it came to marketing them, we used the slogans that talk about the needs. In organizational behavior, we use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to also talk about employees and their needs. So the most basic need is physiological. So we need to, as employees, take care of our physical needs, to have food on the table, to have some sort of shelter. It doesn't have to be a $1 million home. So in the employment area, we talk about employees need to have fair salaries, okay? And, you know, that's a big discussion now in society, is we need to create jobs that pay a livable wage, okay? So that's a big part of, if you ever own a business, I know that you have to meet all of your costs, but make sure you're investing in your employees, because they will be much more motivated to stay and to perform at a much higher level. So if you have salaries that are inconsistent, not only do you have a legal problem, but you will have huge motivation, because today's millennials, they often tell each other what their salaries are. I'm a baby boomer, so anyone born from 46 to 64 are considered baby boomers. We, you know, those of us that started our careers, I started in my 80s, but many of the baby boomers started in the 60s and 70s. We were really told you never reveal your salary. New research shows millennials, so college students at this age, once they get in the workplace, they reveal salaries. So the employers really have to know that they have to have fair and equitable, they have to have comparable wages, so they really cannot be using salaries to have huge differences when people do similar types of work. So that's considered a basic need in the employment area. As we move up then to safety and security, those then become pensions, okay? Now we know that defined pensions have mostly disappeared, so it's matches to your 401ks and those other investment products. The other big area in the workplace that is very critical is when we get to Maslow's belongingness or social, is the fact that we make friends with our work associates, our colleagues, okay? So you have to understand, if you downsize part of your workplace, it causes sadness for the people who are left. They're grateful to have their jobs, but they're sad that the cubicle next to them or the office next to them, that their friend who they used to have lunch with every day is no longer there. So often we don't talk about that enough. It's kind of the theory that, well, you know, just be glad you have a job and keep doing your job. But in our heads, we're thinking that, you know, we're sad. So we need to keep up motivation, especially if there's any kinds of reorganizations or downsizing. So that social part of work, 21st century leaders have a better understanding for now. Okay? And then you go up to ego in the workplace. People like to be thanked. The idea that you have to work 30 years and then you get special recognition. We should also be recognizing 5-year, maybe the first year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20. So think about employee recognition. People are very driven if they are appreciated. And it doesn't have to be, an expensive dinner. It can just be a pizza party. Everybody thinks, well, we can't afford this big dinner. Well, it can be a pizza party. Or just a thank you gift card at Thanksgiving. In the 80s, we used to all get turkeys in the workplace. That kind of has gone by the wayside, but gift cards are very important. And then at the top, as you study Maslow, whether it's from a consumer perspective or a workplace perspective, it's about self-actualization. From a workplace perspective, self-actualization means your internal self. You want to feel good about what you do. You want to be proud to say, in my case, I'm a college professor. I get to make a difference with my college students. So think about that. I'm not trying to be a college professor to impress anyone, but internally to feel like I make a difference. So that making a difference in the workplace is very critical. Some jobs have a bigger make a difference. Other jobs, you really as a leader have to figure out how every employee does make a difference, from your entry-level employees to the people in top management. Self-actualization, then, to go back to a consumer perspective, is often as consumers, we put many of our dreams on the back burner, especially when we become parents. So if we're lucky enough to become empty nesters, children are staying at home much longer into their late 20s. But when you are able to become an empty nester, or if you never had children, self-actualization is all about those dreams that we had when we were younger and we didn't internalize to make ourselves feel. Once we have time, we will take dance classes. We're not doing it to impress anyone, but it makes us feel better. Or we'll learn to cook. Food is a big theme now, so we'll learn to cook gourmet food, not to impress anyone, but it's a dream we've had. Or you get to take that vacation that you've dreamed about, or you go back to school to self-actualize. Now, as many psychologists say, not everybody believes Dr. Maslow's theory, because he placed it as a hierarchy. You need to meet the most basic level, move up the hierarchy. There are economies that maybe they don't have a lot of physiological needs and safety needs taken care of, but they know how to self-actualize. So that's the big conversation in psychology is, can you get to the top without meeting all the other needs below? Maslow proposed that each need had to be met in order, but many of today's psychologists will say that, advise marketing that, it's possible to work on self-actualization before you've met ego needs.
That's a great way to combat the circle of poverty as well. We're almost done, unfortunately, because this has been wonderful in supplement to our text. Have you ever seen demotivators? Have you seen the motivation posters that people hang? Have you ever seen demotivators, where they're opposite and they have slogans that, it's a funny website, but I think what plays the truth that they're basing that off of is the fact that there's things that steal our motivation, things that deter us and our behavior. What would you say from the consumer or the business perspective that our students can do to avoid, like what takes away motivation from others and what can we do to avoid that? Does that make sense?
Great question. Just like there's business cycles, in each of us there's peaks and valleys of motivation. So if you get a lot of negative remarks from your family saying, well, Mom or Dad, you're studying too much, that can tear at our emotion as parents, and it demotivates us. It takes away from our studying time. So what I recommend, and I've taught evening classes with continuing education students and day classes for a long time, is we have to figure out how to deal with those emotions when something's demotivating us. Because remember, motivation is about you being in the driving seat. So figure out a way, if children are tearing at you, that they want more of your attention rather than you studying, figure out a time that you can devote to their attention plus make time for your studying. The same thing happens in the workplace. You have to work late and you're not seeing your children, so it's demotivation. You're like, what am I doing all this extra work for, where I don't feel any work-life balance? Take back the control, because motivation and emotion is very much you're in the driving seat, and figure out ways to re-motivate if there is a demotivation pulling away from us. So, as much as we talk about how positive family can be, family can also demotivate us because they may say we're spending too much time at work or we're spending too much time studying. And think about it holistically. What's that end goal? Eventually, college is about taking care of your family or taking care of yourself, earning enough income. So the long-range goal is greater than the short-term goal. So if you can talk to your family members that this will be something we will all celebrate when I graduate, and it will give us, each of us, a better life, then I'm very much about those open conversations to family members to talk about the importance. And then I think you are back in the driving seat. Now, the other part of motivation we often talk about with demotivation is the New Year. So 2014, January 1st, we all make these New Year's resolutions, and we're going to eat better, exercise more, save more money. Often by 2 months later, we've been demotivated. So what has caused that? And you need to either pencil in the time that you deserve time to exercise, etc. It's often mothers that feel that tension the most because they're trying to balance many things. This can also happen to males too, but many mothers feel this, that they're being pulled and never take the time for themselves. So figure out that you're not going to be a good mother, wife, caretaker unless you take care of yourself. So I think we have to often rewire the way we think, okay, and take control of it and the way we think, and use exercise to sleep better, because we are very much sleep deprived. So all the psychologists are saying that sleep deprivation, that we're sleep deprived is affecting negative emotions. It's affecting us not thinking positively, because we have to get rid of those negative feelings that demotivate us and get back to positive reinforcement.
Well, I thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to blend the two departments, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future. Thank you for giving my students another look at motivation through other lenses.